Getting close to the end, I think, probably this month, talking about the nature of God. We entitled this study, "Who is the Lord?" That's a quote from Pharaoh in Exodus, as he spoke with Moses. Who is the Lord? Pharaoh didn't know the Lord. If you don't know the Lord, you can't worship Him, you can't have a relationship with Him. And Pharaoh certainly didn't know Him, didn't care to know Him. Unfortunately, that's asking a lot of people. And so we started our study looking at various positive, philosophical arguments for God's existence. When I say God, I'm talking about the God of the Bible, for He is the only God there is. And then we, after we got through that several weeks of discussion, then we've been looking at different aspects, different traits, character traits of God's nature and personality. And getting toward the end, and when we finish these, I do want to take a week or two to look at the various members on the concept of the Godhead. The fact that when we talk about God, we talk about His nature, we understand that there are three personalities which partake of the divine nature. So we'll want to take a look at that. Y'all are pretty distracted. For some reason, we're running that thing. Okay, thank you. Everybody I'm looking at is up there reading all the announcements. But I don't think we need to, let's don't leave it on that ugly baby picture. So, yeah, careful. I don't know whose baby that is right now. That picture's been around a while.
Oh, it's been around.
So, we've looked at several things, and when we talk about God, we talk about the fact that He is perfect, perfection. And that idea of perfection really incorporates all of His other attributes. When we start looking at each attribute, we understand, and we talked about this at the beginning, while we've tried to break these things down to get a better grasp of His nature, we understand that not one single attribute of His nature exists in a vacuum by itself. It is part of a whole, and it is defined, or the parameters of it are defined by the other attributes. And so, but everything about Him is perfect and complete. So, if He's omniscient, which He is, then He knows everything perfectly. If He is just and righteous, then He is perfectly just and righteous. Perfect in His love and in His wrath. And so when we start looking at, for instance, this list then of some of the things, I remind myself of some of the ones we looked at. So if I go back and I say, okay, I'm talking about His omnipresence, His omnipotence, His omniscience, His holiness, His love, His goodness, all of that, He is complete and perfect. And they all are part of the whole. And they all affect one another. And of course, we went through each one of those, and not only did we look at those attributes, but we also talked about, it's not only about who He is, but what does that mean to me? How does that affect me? The fact that God is holy means what, as far as I'm concerned? Then I should be holy, right? The fact that God is omnipresent, He's everywhere, and omniscient, knows all things, tells me then that He's always there for me. There's no place, David said, there's no place I can go where you're not there. That ought to be a great comfort. The fact that God is all-powerful, we noted at the end of that discussion, means that there's no promise He can't keep and won't. You know, for us, promises are conditional. We may or may not be able to keep them. That's not so with Him. And so I always have that confidence in that. And so we get down here toward the end and we start thinking then there's one more attribute that really kind of ties me together, and that is His immutability. Because God is unchanging. He's the same today as He was when He created this physical universe, and as He's always been, and He'll be the same tomorrow and forever. And so it's interesting, though, when we try to describe a perfect God, we have to use imperfect language, and that's why we mention it so many times when we talk about God, we use anthropomorphic language. That is, we use language that's really human terminology and apply it to Him even though He's not human. And the Bible does the same thing. You know, the Bible talks about the eyes and the ears of God, the arm. Is the arm of God short that it cannot save? Well, no, it's not. God doesn't have an arm like we have arms. So, but it tries in some sense to help us understand who He is, because our minds are finite and we're trying to understand an infinite being. And of course Isaiah 55:9 says, as high as the heavens is above the earth, what? Yeah, His thoughts are higher than my thoughts. His ways are higher than my ways. And so, you know, that's the task that we've been trying to deal with, is with that much separation between us, trying to get some handle on who He is. And so, immutability, incapable of change. And so with God, that means that even though He feels emotions and responds differently to different situations, He doesn't change His being, He doesn't change His character, He doesn't change His promises, His commands, His purposes, and frankly doesn't change His mind either. And we'll talk about that. Some people read certain language in the Bible and say, He changed His mind. Well, we'll talk about what it means, or what that means. Let's look at a few verses. Let's go to Numbers. We'll just, let's read a few as we go through here. And I think you'll understand why He doesn't change His mind, or why He doesn't change His mind. I think it's pretty obvious if you think about some of the attributes we talk about. But remember, He's never surprised about everything, right? He knows everything that's going to happen already before it's happened. So why would He change His mind, right? Think about that. Numbers 23:19. God is not a man that He should lie, nor a son of man that He should, what? Repent. Has He said, and will He not do? Or has He spoken, and will He not make it good? All right, turn over to 1 Samuel 15. We'll just try to take these in order. 1 Samuel 15. Look at verse 29. And also the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent. For He is not a man that He should relent. By the way, that word relent is there's some other words too we'll see in English. Usually the same word translated. Well, it's because you don't have the same version I do. What does yours say? Change his mind. Okay. Another version says change his mind. Let's go to Psalm 102. Look at verse 25 through 27. Of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. What's going to perish? Physical universe we live in, right? Yes, they will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will change them, and they will be changed, but you are the same, and your years will have no end. You are the same. Turn over to Malachi chapter 3. I think most of you are familiar with this passage, right? Malachi 3, verse 6. Somebody's probably quoted it. For I am the Lord, I do not change. Therefore you are not consumed, those sons of Jacob. You know, there's a comforting thought about the changelessness of God. For you are not consumed. We may talk about that a little bit more later. Turn over to Hebrews. Let's go to the New Testament. There's a couple of passages in Hebrews. Start in Hebrews chapter 6. Look at verse 17. Thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of promise there's that word, immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath that by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. Turn over to chapter 13. Probably familiar with this verse too. Verse 8. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, what? Forever. Turn over to James chapter 1. Look at verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. So, got all kinds of passages dealing with God's immutability, His unchanging character, His unchanging nature. Well, let's discuss for a minute what it means to change. Greek philosophers took a couple of different approaches on change. Some of them, and they were kind of torn between the ideas of permanency and fluctuation, because frankly in life you really see both. But some philosophers believed that everything was in a state of permanency because they said, look, how can we even talk about something if it's never the same? It's got to have some, fixed characteristics. And there was a guy by the name of Parmenides who believed that. He said everything's got to be in a fixed state, and that change is really an illusion. Then there are others that said, well, really all of reality is always in change. Heraclitus said that everything we know goes through change. And frankly, the only permanent thing and the only fixed thing about life is what? Change, right? Everything's changing. That's the only real consistency around us is change. He said one time that it's impossible to step into the same river twice. What do you mean by that? If I step into the river, before I can even take my second step, what? It's a whole different river, right? Constantly on the move. So he said everything's changing. It would have already changed before I took that next step. So, frankly, our human experience is defined by change, right? Alteration, transformation. Let's think about it for a minute. From the time you're born, what are you doing? You're changing every day. And in fact, we talk about when you're parents of young children, how fast they change. So we grow up, we mature. Hopefully during that maturing process, we become more educated, more experienced. We deepen our skills and our talents. But through this whole process, we're changing. And in fact, when you get to be an adult and you look back at things you said or decisions you made, let's say by the time you're 30 or 40, and you think of some of the things that you did when you were 18 or 20 even, you're like, man, I'm not that person. Are you? So, and it's interesting, the guy that's 40 or 45 looking back on the things that he said and did, and his attitudes and the way he looked at life when he was 18 or 20, he's got the same DNA, right? He's got the same fingerprints. So there's a lot of things about him that's the same. It's the same name. He still knows himself as, I still know myself as who I am, but I've undergone a lot of change. So while we can be the same person in some ways, we're different in a lot of ways. And that's life for us. But God, on the other hand, when he's talking to Moses from the bush in Exodus chapter 3, says what? I am that I am. I am who I am. I don't have a beginning or end. And I don't go through the normal processes of degeneration and decay like you do. And here's the thing. We've talked about He's perfect. So He can't change for the better. And He can't change for the worse. Improvement or deterioration is impossible with God. As one writer put it, there is no wrinkle upon the brow of eternity. And so that's why we say when we talk about His omniscience and knowing everything, He doesn't know anything more today than He did yesterday. But everything He knows today, He knew all the time.
All the time.
Otherwise, He'd be changing. He'd be improving. Right? Nothing surprises Him. So, immutability. We've talked about it. He sees all of human history in a single glance. We can only experience the present, right? Yesterday's what?
Gone.
The past. Tomorrow is the future. That's just part of our nature. And frankly, that also extends to non-living things as well, not just living things in this world. You know, scientists say we're actually getting light from stars that no longer exist. Okay? So again, it applies to this entire physical universe, this idea of change. And so I guess instead of being human beings, you could call us human doings or human becomings, maybe. But we're not beings like God. And of course, not all change is good, right? There's two kinds of change. Right? What do we call it? What's the two kinds of change?
Good and bad.
Yeah, what's the other words I'm looking for? What?
Good and bad.
Good and bad.
Good and bad? Give me something else. These are words. These are big people words. These are in the news. If you're a liberal, you don't want to be called a liberal, you want to be called a what?
Progress.
Progress. You want to be called a progressive because it's a positive word. But good change is what we call progress. Bad change is what we call regress. Regress. What did you say? Congress, yeah. Now that could be good or bad change, I guess. But you either have progress or regress, and change is inevitable, and God cannot change because that would indicate some kind of imperfection on His part. And of course, the most important thing we talk about when it comes to His unchanging character is His nature, or His character. What are some things that affect people that can change a person's character in this life? What are some things that can happen?
Any kind of calamity.
Yeah, that's right. Any kind of shock or grief can radically change a person, right? Can change their outlook, change their temperament. You know, we can know a really kind, nice person, all of a sudden they become this, you know, a bitter and crotchety person. They become cynical and callous because of something that happened to them. Stress changes people. But of course, none of that happens to God. He doesn't feel stress, shock, anything of that nature. And so He doesn't become less truthful or less merciful or less just or less good than He used to be. And on the other hand, He doesn't become any more of those things either. See? Because He's perfect. And so that's kind of easy for us to understand because, you know, we're accustomed to this Judeo-Christian worldview, this unchangeableness of God. We kind of take it for granted. But you know, it wasn't always that way for people in the world. We've mentioned this before, but if you lived in the Greek and Roman world, what about your gods?
They changed.
They were pretty capricious people because they were based upon human emotions. And so you just tried to do your best to fly under the radar and not get on their bad side. They didn't have a God like this. Our God doesn't have a bad day. You can't catch Him on a bad day. It's interesting, too, as human beings, we don't always keep our word, so what do we do when we're making agreements with other people? You usually want some kind of guarantee, right? They'll do what they say they're going to do. So maybe a couple hundred years ago, that might have been a what? Maybe even 75 years ago. Might have been a handshake, right? Two fellows might have made an agreement and shook off. In our modern time, what do? We enter a contract. That's right. We get a signed contract. It's interesting, you know, God's made covenants with people. And,
All the way back.
but He doesn't do that because He won't follow through. He really does that to get those people to really think about their responsibilities. Because we're the ones that might or might not come through, keep our end of the deal or our end of the bargain. But God doesn't change. He doesn't break promises. So here's the question then, and this is really where the rubber meets the road. Can God change His mind? And some critics of the Bible say, well, hey, your God changes His mind. Right? What are some situations? I've got about 4 right here I can talk about. Give me some examples of where He supposedly changed His mind. Jonah, right? Moses interceded for the people, probably, more than once. God says, leave me alone. I'm going to what? I'm going to consume them. Moses said, wait. Nineveh, it's already been mentioned by Jonah. What else? Sodom and Gomorrah, although on that case, actually, yeah, he went into a bargaining situation. He ended up doing what he said he was going to do. But yeah, we talked about the children of Israel, the golden calf. What about King Saul? Saul comes back from, he was told to go destroy the Amalekites. And God says in 1 Samuel 15:24, it repenteth me. It repents me that I've set up Saul as king. And so forth. It's interesting in the book of Jonah. What about Noah? God saw the wickedness of man on the earth. It repented the Lord that He had made man. It's interesting to me that even Jonah said, look, I don't want to go preach to these people. Why? He may change his mind. He might not destroy them. And I certainly want these people to be destroyed. So there's this idea then that God changes His mind. But can He is the question. Not the way we do. Not the way we do. And there's several reasons for that. But let's talk about it. What are some reasons that we change our mind? What are some reasons you change your mind?
Sometimes you get more information about a situation.
Okay, very good. Let's think about that. I might get better information about something. I'm getting ready to make a big personal decision or a business decision, and then I find out, I'm getting ready to buy a stock, and I find out the guy that started the company and the brains of it, he's going to retire or whatever. Oh, maybe I won't buy the stock. Whatever. But I get new and improved and better information, perhaps. New information, and so I alter my plans. I may be on a trip, and then I find out, hey, I'm going down to Florida in a couple of days, and I find out a hurricane's going to be there at the same time. I may change my plans. Well, let's apply that to God. Does God give you new information? No. No new information. No new information. So that's out. He's not going to change His mind because He's not aware of something and He just found out about it. Sometimes we change our mind just because we just want something else. I go to the store and I'm going to buy, I saw something in the ad and I said, I'm going to get that. And then I go to the store and lo and behold, there's another one sitting next to it that I like better. It's just a whim. It's a fancy. I just changed my mind because I want to. That's true. Yeah.
Peer pressure makes people change.
Okay, we'll get to that too. That's good. Very good. But sometimes I just change my mind and go, God doesn't change. I just read you all those verses. Yeah. He doesn't change on a whim. He's consistent. That's one reason I can rely on Him. Yeah.
the things we talked about in the Bible, Nineveh and the people on earth, they changed.
Don't get ahead of me now.
Well, you
That's not what I asked.
why people change?
I'm just talking about in general, everyday life.
Emotion, people change due to emotion.
Yeah. Well, like what Patty said, she said some people change their mind because they're forced to. They're put under some, not just peer pressure either. What if I'm going to work. I get up and I go to work. I'm heading to work and some guy hijacks me at the gas station. Puts me at gunpoint and says, no, you're not going to work. You're going over there. You're driving me over there. Well, I changed my mind, by the way, didn't I? Wasn't what I planned to do that day, but, that guy changed my plans. Well, does that happen to God? Can anybody force God to change his plans, change his mind? No. So, we live in the present. And frankly, we're ignorant of anything in the universe that's not within our own perception or experience. I can't know the future unless, of course, God tells me the future. And so basically, when I get down to it, I have to admit that I'm very ignorant of this universe and the world around me. I can only be one place at one time. But that's not true with God. Remember all the things we've studied about him. His omniscience, his omnipresence. It's interesting, if you go back, you ever gone back to your old hometown and driven by the old house you grew up in, or you go back to the university, maybe where you went to school, you haven't been there a long time. And what do you find when you get there? Things that what? Change. Yeah, a lot has changed, but you start getting this nostalgic feeling, right? And you start reminiscing in your mind, and you start remembering what? What do you start remembering? The way it used to look, right? You sit there out front, you're looking at that house, and you start thinking about, man, when I was a kid, this was over there, and that was over there, and that wasn't there, that tree wasn't there, or whatever.
And the trees were probably about this big.
That's right. Lots of change, and you start reminiscing. But here's the thing. We're bound by time, so I can't be in both places at the same time. I can't be back here where the way it looked when I was a kid. I can think about that for a while, but then all of a sudden I'm jolted back to the present reality, and here it is the way it is now. Now compare that to God. He sees the whole thing at the same time.
Even what it's going to look like tomorrow.
Absolutely. So, narratives in which God appears to change his mind, they generally deal with what? When we go back to all those instances where it looks like God is changing his mind, they generally deal with what? What was going on? Why did he change his mind about what? Supposedly changed his mind about what?
The conditions change.
Yeah, supposedly these are generally situations where there's a threat of reward or punishment, right? Or judgment upon someone because of their activities. Those are generally the situations in which people say God has changed his mind. Well, let's go to Jeremiah chapter 18 and look at verse 7. The instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom to pluck up, pull down, and destroy it, if that nation against whom I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent of the disaster that I thought to bring upon it. And the instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to build and to plant it, if it does evil in my sight so that it does not obey my voice, then I will relent concerning the good with which I said I've been. Now, God's made a statement there. Here's what I'm going to do, right? And what I'm going to do is going to be dependent upon what? Yeah, what you do, right? Now go over to 26, Jeremiah 26. Look at verse 3. Perhaps everyone will listen and turn from his evil way, that I may relent concerning the calamity which I purpose to bring on them because of the evil of their doings. Look down in verse 13. Now therefore amend your ways and your doings, and obey the voice of the Lord your God, and the Lord will relent concerning the doom that he has pronounced against you. So we get these phrases, relent, repent. There's a Hebrew word, N-A-C-H-A-M or N-A-H-A-M. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. To be sorry, repent, regret. Some writers have said the origin of this word seems to reflect the idea of breathing deeply. Hence the physical display of one's feelings, usually sorrow, compassion, or comfort. Strong's Hebrew and Chaldee dictionary defines it as to sigh, breathe strongly, by implication to be sorry, in other words, in a favorable sense, to pity, console, rue, to avenge. So let's think about it for a minute. Prophecy always has a conditional element in it, whether it's explicitly stated or not. Always. So let's take it down to our level. I tell my child, here's the deal. If, let's say it's a teenager. If you will clean your room today, this is Saturday, if you will clean your room today, then you may go out with your friends to the movies or whatever tonight. But if you don't, you're not going. So, he doesn't do it. And I say, you're not going. Or he does do it. And I say, okay, you can go. Have I changed my mind? Have I changed my mind? No. Actually, I've been consistent in what I said I was going to do. I've said, if you do this, you can go. If you don't do this, you can't go. What would be an example of me changing my mind? If he doesn't do it, and I said you can't go, but he comes and talks his way, talks me into letting him go, then I've changed my mind. I've been inconsistent. Right? The other was just two conditions. If you do this, you get to do this. If you don't do this, you don't get to do that. But I have kept my word. I have not changed my mind. So, in these circumstances, in all these instances where God says, if you do this, I'll bless you, and if you don't do this, I won't. He's not changed his mind. He's done exactly what he said he was going to do. And here's the thing, and here's what the human race refuses to accept is, he won't change his mind. See, what they think is that I won't do it, and then I'll talk him out of it anyway. I don't have to do what God says, and he's still going to let me go to heaven. And if he did, he would have changed his mind, and he wouldn't be God. But he doesn't change his mind. And whatever he says he's going to do, just because the statements are conditional doesn't mean he's changed his mind. And so I think it's easy to see when we start thinking about it in our own terms of how we deal with our own children. We haven't changed our mind. If we're consistent, we haven't changed our mind. It's only when we don't do what we say we're going to do.
That's right.
You're right.
Basically for us, and what I'm understanding is people and situations change, but whatever we do or anybody does, God's intents and purposes never change.
And I think and that's a good point, but here's the thing. We have to understand too, now what did I start out saying at the beginning of this lesson? A lot of the language that's used in the Bible to try to describe to us the way God deals with us is anthropomorphic. Okay? So when we start talking about terms in the Old Testament, God repented. God relented. Well, let me ask you this. Let's go back to our same example. The child didn't clean his room. He can't go out and you don't let him go out. How do you feel? How do you feel? Seriously, as a parent. Do you like that? Does that make you feel good? That Johnny didn't get to go do what he wanted to do? Do you sit home and laugh and say, oh man, I feel great because I got to punish Johnny tonight? Is that what did you want? You wanted him to be able to do what he wanted to do. You didn't want to have to punish him. God didn't want to have to punish these people. He feels the same way. Except a lot more deeply about us than we can about our own children. When he said in the days of Noah, it repents me. I'm grieved that he's terribly, it concerns him that he's going to have to destroy the entire human race for their behavior. He doesn't like that. But he's not going to change his mind either. He wouldn't be God if he did. Here's the thing. It's anthropomorphic. God knows everything that can and will happen. So now keep this, I want you to listen to this. There's no need for him to take a course of action knowing that it will not succeed or that he will have to alter his plans. He never has to take that course of action because he knows everything before it happens. I hope you can see from this how terribly pernicious the doctrine of premillennialism. It impinges upon the nature of God. When religious groups take the position that God sent His Son and He was somehow surprised that they rejected Him, and He had to come up with the church as, quote, plan B until Jesus could come back and set up His earthly kingdom, that is it's a terrible slap in the face of God and His nature. Because God is never surprised by him. He doesn't have plan B's. Nothing thwarts his purposes. He does exactly what he's going to do. So no, he doesn't change his mind. That's the simple answer I can give you. When you read those passages that seem to indicate that, you're not reading them correctly, as a lot of people are not. It's anthropomorphic language to indicate, but again, it just means that prophecy is conditional. He gives people choices. We are free moral agents. It has to be conditional. It has to be conditioned upon our own behavior and our response to Him. He's not going to force us to do anything we don't want to do. Just like our own children are free moral agents. And so He does experience pain and regret in some godly way. I can't explain it, but He doesn't enjoy punishing us any more than we enjoy punishing our own children. It's really a description of God's actions and feelings from a human perspective. We have to describe them somehow in human language. So, the fact that He doesn't change, again, that's another one of those characteristics that ought to be what to me? How should that make me feel? The fact that God doesn't change.
Should be comforting.
Yeah, it should give me great comfort. Extreme comfort. I can always rely that on Him that He's going to do exactly what He says He's going to do. If I've been baptized for the remission of my sins, and He says, if you do that, I'll wash away your sins and save you, then I can take comfort in that. Right? I'll walk in the light as He is in the light. I can take comfort in the fact that I'm going to be saved in the last day. If I look out here in this audience, I see how many of you are saved, and then half of you don't raise your hand because you think that that's arrogant or because you're not sure. You don't have to be not sure.
He said He'll never leave us nor forsake us.
That positive part of His immutability, the Bible calls His life. That positive part of God's unchanging nature, the Bible calls His life. There's a song in our book that I think of. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is your faithfulness. That's really a positive way to put that He doesn't change. Right? Psalm 36:5. Thy mercy, O Lord, is in the heavens, and thy faithfulness reaches unto the clouds. Thy faithfulness is unto all generations. Psalm 119:90. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness, Lamentations 3:23. God is faithful, 1 Corinthians 1:9. God is faithful, 1 Corinthians 10:13. Faithful is he that calls you, 1 Thessalonians 5:24. But the Lord is faithful, 2 Thessalonians 3:3. If we believe not, yet he abideth faithful, 2 Timothy 2:13. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised, Hebrews 10:23. Faithful Creator, 1 Peter 4:19. If we confess our sins, he is what? Faithful and just to forgive us our sins, 1 John 1:9. That is a positive, comforting thought for me when I start thinking about God's unchanging nature. He's faithful. Never breaks a promise. Never changes his mind. Always will do what he says he's going to do. And there's nothing that can stop him from doing what he says he's going to do. And he knows everything, so he's never surprised, never planned this. All right, the bell is on.
It also ties to our faithfulness because he wants us to be faithful. And so when James says, show me your faith, faith without works is dead, well, it's tied to trusting and obeying God. That's how we define it. Faith, my personal faith is trusting and obeying God. That's why it's not like that's what we came to.
All right.